The wind rolled across the plains like a restless spirit, carrying dust and the scent of rain that never came. The horizon was burning gold, and the little town of Bramble Creek sat quiet under the weight of another long summer day. Horses shifted at the hitching posts. The saloon doors creaked on their hinges, and somewhere far off, a coyote howled to an empty sky. At the edge of that forgotten town, a cowboy named Jesse Cole stood outside the old chapel, hat in hand, boots planted deep in the dirt. He wasn't the kind of man who smiled much. Life had carved its lessons deep into his face. Folks around said he'd loved once, long ago, and when she left, Jesse stopped looking for anything soft in the world. He worked, he rode, and he kept his heart locked up behind the same silence he wore like a coat. But that morning, Bramble Creek whispered something new. Word had spread like wildfire. Jesse Cole was finally getting married. No one believed it at first. Some said it was a joke. Others said the cowboy had lost a bet. But when the church bells started to ring, the folks came running from every corner of town. Curiosity is stronger than disbelief. Jesse stood there calm as a stone, watching the road that led out past the wheat fields. The preacher wiped sweat from his brow. The bridesmaids fidgeted, and still no sign of the bride. The sky turned orange, the sun dipped low, and someone whispered, "Maybe she ain't comin'." But Jesse didn't move. He just shifted the brim of his hat, eyes fixed on that dusty road. Then through the haze of heat and dust, a wagon appeared, an old one, pulled by a single tired mule. The wheels groaned, the mule brayed, and the folks fell quiet as the wagon came to a stop in front of the chapel. And there she was, Clara Bennett, not a woman of fancy things or polished manners, but one who carried the air of storms and sunsets. Her dress wasn't white, it was cream faded, like it had seen miles of road and hardship. Her veil was torn on one side, and her hair had slipped from its pins. And when she stepped down, everyone saw them, her shoes. Torn, scuffed, one strap hanging loose. The crowd murmured. A woman gasped. Someone whispered, "Mercy, she came like that?" But Clara didn't lower her eyes. She lifted her chin and walked, each step slow and steady, leaving prints in the dust like a message. "I made it here." Inside, the preacher cleared his throat, but no one was watching him. All eyes were on Jesse, how he would react. This hard cowboy, whose pride was known across the county. He looked down at her shoes, then up at her face. And for a moment the silence stretched like the sky, long, endless, fragile. Then a small smile broke across his weathered face. He stepped forward, reached out a hand and said quietly, "Then you've brought everything." The crowd went still. Clara blinked, confused. "Everything?" she whispered. Jesse nodded, his voice low and rough like gravel. "You brought your courage, your faith and your heart. The rest don't matter none." Something in his tone melted the air around them. The town ladies who had come to whisper gossip now pressed handkerchiefs to their eyes. The men who thought Jesse Cole had no soul stood silent. He took her hand, helped her up the chapel steps, and the door closed behind them. But the sound of the wind seemed to soften, as if the prairie itself had exhaled. Inside that small wooden chapel, light filtered through cracked windows, turning dust into gold. The preacher began the ceremony, his voice trembling like he could feel the weight of the moment too. Jesse stood tall, his hat now resting on the pew, and Clara tried to steady her breath. Her mind raced through memories, the long ride from her father's farm, the rainstorm that soaked her dress, the wagon that broke down 5 miles out, and the moment she nearly turned back. But something in her heart, something stubborn and pure, had whispered, "Keep going!" She had nothing left to offer but her heart, her tired hands and those torn shoes. Yet standing beside Jesse, she realized maybe that was enough. The preacher's voice rose. "Do you take this woman?" "I do," Jesse said before the words could even finish. His voice carried through the chapel, deep and certain, like thunder before rain. Clara's lip trembled. She looked up at him, eyes shining. "I do," she whispered. Outside, the wind picked up again, this time softer, gentler. When they stepped out of the chapel as husband and wife, the world felt changed. Jesse led her to his horse, a big brown Mustang named Rust. She hesitated, touching the torn hem of her dress. Jesse noticed. He knelt, brushing the dust from her shoe with his hand, and said, "These shoes tell me more about you than 1,000 fine things ever could." Clara laughed softly, the first true laugh he'd heard in years. The people of Bramble Creek cheered, but Jesse didn't look at them. His eyes were only for her. He helped her onto the horse, climbed up behind her, and together they rode into the wide open plains. The sunset bled across the sky, painting them gold. And though the road ahead was uncertain, they rode like two souls who finally found their way home. As they disappeared into the horizon, the townsfolk whispered about that moment, the cowboy who didn't care about torn shoes, and the bride who walked through dust and doubt to reach his heart. And for years to come, people would say, "You remember Jesse Cole and Clara Bennett? That's what love's supposed to look like, worn, weathered, but real." Morning light broke over the plains like a slow breath, pushing shadows back toward the far hills. The smell of coffee drifted from the old ranch house, and somewhere out near the barn, a rooster called the world awake. Inside, Clara Bennett Cole stood barefoot on the wooden floorboards, her wedding dress folded neatly over a chair. The shoes, those torn, road-beaten shoes, sat by the door like quiet witnesses to everything that had happened. The first night as Jesse's wife had been quiet. They hadn't said much after the wedding. Jesse had built the fire, handed her a blanket, and simply sat across from her, watching the flames dance. It wasn't awkward, it was peaceful, the kind of silence that feels safe. And for the first time in years, Jesse didn't feel the weight of his loneliness pressing down on him. Now, as the dawn stretched across the prairie, he came in from the barn, hat low, rope coiled over his shoulder. His boots were dusted from the morning's chores. "Coffee's hot," Clara said softly. He nodded, poured a tin cup full, and took a slow sip. "Best thing I've tasted in a long time." Clara smiled, shyly brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's just coffee." "Not today it ain't," he said. And right there, under the creak of the windmill and the smell of hay, something tender began to grow between them, quiet, steady, unspoken. The days of dust and hope. Life on the ranch wasn't easy. The fences needed mending, the cattle roamed far, and the storms came sudden and mean. Clara learned to ride, to rope, to cook over fire, and to keep going when the days stretched longer than her strength. Her hands grew rough, her shoulders strong. She no longer cared about the shoes she once worried over. The land had a way of stripping away everything but truth. And Jesse, he changed too. The man who once kept his heart locked up began to speak more, laugh more. He'd watch her hang laundry in the wind, her hair wild and her dress flapping like a flag of freedom. And he'd think, this is what peace looks like. Sometimes he'd find her sitting on the porch at sunset, staring at the same horizon he used to fear. He'd sit beside her and say, "Still thinking about running?" She'd laugh softly. "If I did, you'd just come find me." He'd grin. "You're damn right!" And they'd sit there in silence, watching the sun fall and the stars crawl out. Two souls that had fought through too much to ever let go again. When the rains came, one autumn the skies broke open. For 3 days, rain fell harder than it had in years. The creek swelled, the fields flooded, and half the town thought they'd lose their crops. Jesse rode out in the storm to help the neighbors shore up the bridge. When he came back, soaked to the bone, he found Clara kneeling by the window, praying over a lantern light. He stopped in the doorway, dripping water onto the floorboards. "You praying for me or the rain?" he asked with a tired grin. "Both," she said without turning. "And maybe a little for your stubbornness." He chuckled, set his hat down, and crossed to her. She stood, and before he could say a word, she wrapped her arms around him, mud, rain, and all. That night, when the storm howled like a living thing, they sat together by the fire, hands intertwined. And Jesse thought, "I used to think love was about pretty dresses and fancy promises. But it's this. It's sitting through the storm and knowing she's right here beside me." The torn shoes. Years passed. The ranch grew. The town changed. But one thing never did, those old torn shoes by the door. Clara never threw them away. Every visitor asked the same question. "Why keep those old things, Clara? You've got better now." And she'd always smile and say, "Because they remind me how far love can walk when the road gets hard." One evening, Jesse sat on the porch, polishing his saddle when he caught sight of those shoes again. The leather was cracked, faded from time. He called out to Clara. She came out carrying 2 cups of tea, the light soft on her face. "You ever think about that day?" he asked. "Every time I see those shoes," she said. He took her hand, calloused fingers brushing hers. "You brought everything that mattered that day. Guess I didn't know it till you showed up." She smiled, eyes glimmering like starlight on the prairie. "And you gave me everything I didn't even know I needed." They sat there together as the last of the sun disappeared, the world turning quiet around them. A love that stayed. When people talked about Jesse and Clara Cole, they didn't speak about riches or beauty. They spoke about faith, about the woman who walked miles with torn shoes, and the cowboy who saw her heart before her flaws. Their love became a kind of legend. The preacher told their story in sermons. Young couples came to ask Jesse for advice, and he'd just say, "Find someone who'll walk through the dust for you. The rest don't matter." And when he grew old and gray, Jesse kept those shoes by the bed. Even when Clara was gone, he'd look at them and whisper, "You still brought everything." Because love, real love, doesn't shine. It endures. It doesn't come wrapped in perfection. It comes wearing torn shoes and carrying courage. And in the quiet of the plains, where the wind still carried whispers of the past, the story of Jesse and Clara Cole lived on. A story of dust, of grace, and of 2 hearts that chose each other over everything else.